When I opened my eyes, the world was a blur, soft lights, sterile walls, the beep of machines syncing with my heartbeat, but louder than any of it was one thought, clear as a scalpel slicing through memory. She doesn't deserve me. The last thing I remembered before the anesthesia was her whisper, "I'll be here when you wake up." But her perfume was gone from the room. Her phone wasn't charging on the side table. The chair next to my bed was empty, untouched. I lay there, numb in body but burning in soul, replaying everything I gave her, my time, my patience, my devotion, my life on the operating table. All so she wouldn't have to cry alone. All so she'd know someone in this world was willing to go through pain for her. But she wasn't there when it mattered. And when I reached for my phone while shaking hands, I saw her story. Her smile, her soft "out for peace" caption with another man's hand holding hers across a beachside dinner. And that was it. The beginning of her freedom. And the end of my silence. I survived death. Now I was about to bury the illusion I had called love. They always say you can feel it before it happens, like the air turns heavy, like your chest knows a storm is coming, even if the sky stays blue. That last week before the surgery, her eyes stopped meeting mine. We'd be at dinner, 2 candles flickering between us, one struggling to stay lit, the other already dead. I'd talk about the recovery process, the scans, the risks. She'd nod, say, "We'll get through this," like she was reciting lines from a play she no longer believed in. Then her eyes would flick down, to her phone, to a text, to someone not in the room. That phone had become her escape route. Every time my voice trembled from fear, hers trembled too, but not because she was scared for me. It was like guilt was pressing her vocal cords, like she couldn't speak too long without choking on her own secrets. I remember reaching across the table one night. My hand covered hers, gently, but it felt like touching marble. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold back either. Just sat there. Still. As if being touched by me was a task she couldn't avoid. And her kisses. They used to linger. Her lips used to mean something, but now, they barely touched mine. A quick press, dry, mechanical, like I was a box she needed to check off before bed. 3 days before the operation, I asked her to spend the night. I didn't say it out loud, but I needed her. Not just physically, emotionally, to anchor me before they put me under, to whisper something real while I could still hear her voice. She looked at me like I'd asked too much. "Hospitals give me anxiety," she said. "I need to stay in a calm space before tomorrow, for my mental health." I forced a smile. I told her I understood. But inside, I broke a little. Not because she wouldn't stay, but because she didn't even hesitate. She packed her things that night in silence. I watched from the bed as she folded her cardigan, unplugged her charger, spritzed perfume on her wrist. She used to kiss my forehead before she left the room, but that night, she only waved. I couldn't sleep. The room was too quiet without her breathing beside me. I counted the seconds on the digital clock as they passed. Red numbers glowing like wounds on the wall. At 2:47 a.m., I got out of bed and opened the drawer beside me. Inside was a photo strip of us. Taken in a booth last year. Her head tilted into mine, my arm around her shoulders. Her smile? It used to be the reason I believed in things. I stared at that photo for an hour, then I placed it face down, because the person in that picture no longer existed. The next morning, they wheeled me into pre-op. My hands were shaking, even under the blanket. The nurse kept asking if I wanted to call someone. I told her no. Because what would I say? "Please come, hold my hand even though your heart is already somewhere else." No, I had too much dignity left to beg. The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward from 10, but I didn't. I stared at the ceiling, at the pale lights that looked like halos, and I thought about her perfume, soft jasmine, sweet lies. As the sedative kicked in, my last thought wasn't of dying, it was of truth. And the truth was, I was already halfway into that operating room alone. Because the love I once trusted to carry me through this, had already exited stage left. She wasn't the girl beside the hospital bed anymore, she was the ghost I was still trying to hold. And as my mind slipped into black, I realized something no one had prepared me for. The real surgery wasn't on my brain, it was on my heart. And she was the one holding the scalpel. Fade to black. The heartbeat monitor fades, the curtain rises in silence, And somewhere far away, she laughs in a photo I'll never see in person. He made it, he's conscious. The surgeon's voice echoed like a bell in a cathedral, soft but final, a declaration of survival, of breath returning, of life, barely stitched back together. My eyes fluttered open like rusted shutters. The world was slow, soaked in sterile white and humming machines. The scent of antiseptic clung to the air like a second skin. And yet, all I searched for was her. I turned my head slowly, every muscle groaning as if waking from a decade of sleep. The chair next to me was empty, no warmth on the cushion, no jacket tossed across the arm, just a perfectly undisturbed silence. My throat felt like it had been sanded raw. I tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. My mother rushed forward, tears blooming in her eyes, gently pressing a cold cloth to my forehead. My sister whispered, "You're okay, you did it." But their voices blurred into the hum of machines. Because in that moment, I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for her face. And it wasn't there. She didn't come, not on the first day, not on the second, no calls, no texts, no messages left at the desk, not even a flower by my bed. My phone rested beside me, screen dimmed, battery slowly draining. I unlocked it with a trembling thumb, heart pounding harder than it should in my condition. Maybe she was just waiting for the right time. Maybe she had left me something sweet, an "I love you," or a "I knew you'd make it." But instead, I saw sunlight, wine glasses, beach waves, and him. She had posted a story, two, in fact. One with her laughing into the wind, eyes closed, lips curved into a smile that used to belong to me. The other, her hand in someone else's. The caption read, "Healing in peace." My heart monitor beeped faster. I tapped through the carousel with fingers still numb from anesthesia, every swipe, a blade, each frame another incision she left on me without ever stepping into the room. There she was, barefoot on the sand. Wearing that dress. The soft ivory one I bought for her birthday last year. I remembered wrapping it, folding tissue paper around it like it was fragile, like she was. She was twirling in it now, for someone else's camera, someone who knew how to hold the angle that caught her best side, the same angle I memorized under golden lights and hospital ceilings. But what broke me wasn't the dress, it was the bracelet. Gold, thin, etched with her initials on one side and mine on the other. I gave it to her the night before my MRI. Told her, even if I forget everything, this will help me remember what matters. And there she was, wearing it as she laughed at a joke that wasn't mine, holding a hand that wasn't mine, looking more alive than I'd seen her in months. It was cruelly poetic. I had just survived the knife, but she had already buried me emotionally, days before I even left the OR. The nurse came in and adjusted my IV drip. She asked if I was in pain. I nodded, but not for the reasons she thought. I turned the phone face down. Its screen was too loud, too bright, too full of life I wasn't part of anymore. My mother held my hand tighter. She didn't ask where she was, didn't need to. I think she knew. Mothers always do. The doctor came later that evening, speaking in a tone of triumph. "Your scans look clean, strong recovery ahead, it's a miracle." But his words felt hollow, because what was the point of surviving a miracle if the person you lived for couldn't be bothered to witness it? I looked out the hospital window. It was raining now, not a downpour, but a soft drizzle, the kind that doesn't flood the earth but seeps in through the cracks. I wondered if she even knew, if she cared, if the sound of my name in the doctor's mouth meant anything anymore, or if the beach was louder, if his voice was more soothing, if peace tasted better when it was soaked in betrayal. The night nurse brought a tray of soup and a small get well card. It was unsigned, typed, probably from a volunteer. But still, it was more than she had given. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the images kept playing. Her spinning on the sand, her eyes crinkled in laughter, his shadow in the frame. And I thought, maybe I did die a little on that table. Maybe the man who trusted her completely never woke up. Because the version of me lying in that bed now? He was learning that survival wasn't always salvation. Sometimes, it was just the start of a quieter heartbreak. She came 2 days later. Not with flowers, not with tears, not even with a breathless apology. Just the sound of heels clicking against the hallway floor like distant thunder, too polished for grief. I heard her voice before I saw her, soft, measured, cautious, like someone approaching a stranger's room. "Is he awake?" she asked a nurse. I turned my head slowly, heart clenched in anticipation, like maybe I'd misjudged everything, maybe she'd rush in, maybe she'd cry, maybe she'd finally see me. But when the door opened, she didn't move past the frame. She stood there like a guest at a funeral she forgot to RSVP to. Her eyes skimmed the room like she was scanning for exits. They landed on the IV drip, the heart monitor, the tubes, then the clock, but never on me. It was as if the sight of me, alive, stitched back together, was harder to face than my death would have been. I meant to come sooner," she said finally. Her voice was flat, like a line she'd practiced until the emotion dried out. "But hospitals make me anxious." Anxious. I blinked. She looked perfectly composed to me. Hair done, lashes curled, outfit camera ready. Grief didn't live in her, only discomfort. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, not to call anyone, just to hold it, like she needed something else to touch because I was untouchable now. "You said you'd be here when I woke up," I rasped, voice still raw from the breathing tube. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "I needed space to breathe too," she said. Space, she said it like it was a right she had earned. As if my coma had been a burden she needed healing from. My chest rose and fell, slow and deliberate, as I studied her face. There was no trace of fear, no worry, only performance. "Who's he?" I asked. That was when her mask cracked, just for a second. Her eyes widened, her lips parted. A single breath stalled in her throat. Then she blinked, recalculated, and smiled like a politician in damage control. "He's just a friend," she said too quickly. "I needed support. You wouldn't understand." Wouldn't understand. As if the man lying in the hospital bed, the man who had faced death with her name on his lips, was incapable of grasping loneliness. My hands trembled beneath the blanket, not from weakness, from the kind of rage that comes when betrayal is dressed in silk and served cold. "You needed support," I repeated slowly. "While I was under a knife?" She stepped in, just 1 foot past the doorway, then hesitated again, still not sitting, still not reaching for me. She fiddled with her bracelet. My bracelet. The one with both our initials, gold, thin, shining in the hospital light like irony in its purest form. I stared at it. She noticed. She slid it off and tucked it into her coat pocket. And that hurt more than the incision in my skull. Because it wasn't guilt that made her hide it, it was convenience. She didn't want him to see it later. I was scared. She tried again, softer this time. "I didn't know if you'd make it." I panicked. "So you ran to someone else's arms?" Silence. She looked away again, and in that silence, I saw everything. The truth wasn't in what she said, it was in what she couldn't say, the way her gaze kept searching for a reason to leave, the way her feet stayed angled toward the door, the way she never once touched me. And I realized, she wasn't here because she missed me, she was here because I woke up. "You thought I'd stay asleep," I said, almost to myself. She stiffened. I laughed, bitter and broken. "You were hoping I wouldn't wake up and ask questions, weren't you?" "That's not fair," she snapped, finally showing something real, but it wasn't sadness, it was offense. She was offended that I dared to name her cowardice, that I had the audacity to make her presence feel like a confession. "I gave you everything," I said through clenched teeth. "My time, my health, my trust." I paused. "My future." She shook her head. "You don't understand what I was going through." "No," I cut in. "You don't understand what I was dying through." She stepped back, 1 foot out the door again. Her mouth opened to say something else, another excuse, another deflection, but then the monitor beeped sharply. My heart rate had spiked. The nurse rushed in, told her she needed to leave. I didn't argue. She nodded and disappeared without protest. Not a goodbye, not a promise, not a tear. Just the scent of her perfume fading into the hallway. I lay there, watching the ceiling as nurses adjusted my IV, wondering how silence could be so loud. And for the first time since I woke up, I wasn't scared of dying. I was scared of what I had survived for. The window beside my bed was icy to the touch. Condensation clung to the glass like breath held too long, foggy, fragile, trying to disappear. Outside, the world moved without me. Children in coats ran across the courtyard, their laughter sharp and bright like sunlight cutting through clouds. Their joy echoed up toward my room, reaching a man who could no longer remember what joy felt like. I sat propped against white pillows, hands weak in my lap, IV trailing from one wrist like a leash. The machines beeped in a rhythm too steady to feel human anymore. My body was healing, but my soul still bled. Not from the surgery, but from something far deeper, something colder, something named her. I'd stared out that window for 2 days, waiting for something. Anything. A message. A knock. A whisper of remorse. But all I got was silence and the mechanical hum of recovery. Until that morning. The nurse wheeled in a basket of flowers. Soft white lilies tucked between sun-colored roses. Elegant. Understated. Beautiful. No card, just a satin ribbon tied in a loose bow. Pale peach, gentle shimmer under the hospital lights. I froze. That ribbon. I knew that exact shade. It was the same one she had wrapped my birthday gift in last year, the one where she said, "It reminded me of warmth, like your hands when you hold mine." Back when her words were real, back when love lived in the way she touched my hair or rested her head on my shoulder during quiet nights. For a fleeting, foolish second, I thought, maybe she remembered, maybe she had finally broken her silence. I turned to the nurse, my voice a thin breath. Who sent those? She looked at me with a soft smile. Not sure if you'll remember her. Alicia, the lab tech who prepped you for surgery, she said she admired your strength, thought you deserved something that would bloom. A pause. Then she added, Jen joins. Billy, she said. People like you shouldn't go unnoticed. Unnoticed. The word lodged itself in my throat like a splinter. Noticed, by a stranger, seen, by someone who only knew me through charts, scans, and 30 minutes of pre-op small talk. Meanwhile, the woman I gave everything to, the one who kissed my forehead before the anesthesia took me, the one I fought to stay alive for. She hadn't even looked at me since. The nurse left. I stared at the flowers like they were a painting hung in a museum I wasn't allowed to enter. Beautiful, distant, fragile. The petals brushed against each other with every draft from the heater vent, soft rustles like sighs, like the gentle apologies I never got. And it hit me, not like a revelation, not like a scream, but like a quiet, shattering truth. A stranger noticed my pain more than the woman I nearly died for. I turned back to the window. Those children were still playing. One boy had fallen and scraped his knee. A girl offered him her scarf and helped him up. Simple kindness, unprompted, real. That's what love was supposed to look like, not silence, not staged stories, not captions hiding betrayal. I reached for the photo strip on the side table, the one from the old booth at the arcade, her head on my shoulder, my smile, genuine, unguarded. I stared at it, then flipped it over. I didn't want to see it anymore, because that boy in the photo, he still believed in her, he still believed she'd be there when he opened his eyes. He hadn't survived the surgery. I pressed my fingers to the ribbon. Not because I wanted to pretend, but because I needed to feel something that wasn't pain. Alicia. She didn't owe me anything. She hadn't promised forever. She hadn't posted me and then ghosted me. And yet, she noticed. Noticed when I winced during the IV. Noticed when I whispered thank you before the anesthesia hit. Noticed that my silence wasn't strength. It was survival. The door creaked open a little. Not her. Just another nurse doing rounds, checking vitals, adjusting wires, smiling politely. I wanted to ask her something, anything, but I stayed quiet, because I was too full of words no one had stayed long enough to hear. The sky outside turned gold with the start of evening, and for once, I didn't think about her, I thought about myself. About the man in the bed, the one learning how to heal without the person he once trusted most, the one discovering that strangers could offer more comfort than lovers. And in that glow of dying light, I realized, maybe I didn't lose her, maybe I lost the illusion, and maybe that's how healing begins. She wasn't extraordinary, not in the way stories usually write women who change lives. No dramatic entrances, no perfume trailing behind her like a second voice, no flirtation tucked into her gaze. She wore a plain white coat with ink stains on the pocket, a loose ponytail, strands falling across her cheeks, and when she walked into the room, it was always quiet, like she respected the air too much to disturb it. Her name tag read Alicia, but I didn't need it. I remembered her from before the surgery. She steadied my wrist while drawing blood, murmuring "cold pinch" before the needle touched skin. Her voice was soft, not timid, not stiff, just careful, like she knew how easily people broke and didn't want to be the one to break them. She came in around mid-afternoon. I was awake but pretending to sleep, staring through the window, letting the world blur into watercolor. She didn't disturb the moment. She just placed a warm ceramic mug on the tray beside me and whispered, "No coffee, it spikes your pressure, so I brought chamomile." I blinked. No one had brought me anything personal. Everything was filtered through checklists, prescriptions, or empty routine. But Alicia, she'd remembered a comment I barely recalled saying. I turned to look at her. She didn't smile for effect, just gave a small, real one, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. The next day, she was back. Not as my nurse, she wasn't even assigned to me anymore, but she came to check my chart anyway. Refilled my water before I asked, adjusted the blanket without a word. We didn't speak much, but when she did say something, it stayed. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered once after seeing the tremor in my hand when I tried to hold a spoon. And it wasn't the words themselves, it was the way she said them, not as encouragement, but as fact. Like she believed it beefed. Or I even did. There was no romance, no sparks flying, no cinematic music in the background. She didn't lean close or touch my fingers longer than needed. She just saw me. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't trying to perform strength. I wasn't bracing for abandonment. I was just me, tired, wounded, recovering, and somehow, that was enough. I watched her from the bed, noticing things I never noticed in anyone before. The way she bit the inside of her cheek when concentrating, the way she apologized to the machines when bumping into them, like they were alive, the way she hummed under her breath, barely a sound, more like a memory trying to escape her lips. I don't know what it was, but there was peace in her presence, not silence, not indifference, peace. One morning, I asked her why she brought me tea. She paused, then shrugged. "Because you looked like someone who needed to be treated like a person, not a patient." And that broke something open inside me, because no one had treated me like a person in a long time. Not since the moment I became her boyfriend with the tumor. Not since my identity was rewritten by illness, obligation, and silent expectation. Alicia didn't see a man who had survived. She saw a man still surviving, and she met him with dignity, not pity. She didn't love me, she didn't even know me, but she cared, genuinely, silently, without performance or debt. And as I lay there, eyes stinging without tears, I began to realize something terrible. Had I really been so starved for love that I had called neglect devotion? Had I confused patience with loyalty, silence with sacrifice? Because this simple, human act of noticing, of offering tea instead of coffee, water before it's asked for, warmth without expectation, it felt like sunlight after a decade of fog. I didn't ask for her number, didn't ask for promises, didn't try to force a future into her kindness. But something in me began to shift. Not toward her, but away from the girl I'd been clinging to for far too long. Because once someone sees you, really sees you, you stop trying to be seen by those who never did. That night, I didn't check my ex's social feed. Didn't search for updates, didn't replay memories. Instead, I sat in silence, fingers wrapped around the last cup of tea Alicia had left behind. It was still warm, and for the first time, so was I. The ceiling above me was pale and flickering, the kind of white that isn't warmth, but absence. Two nurses adjusted the wheels on my bed, their chatter soft, sterile. I was being taken for my final scan, the last MRI before they'd determine whether everything they had cut, stitched and zapped had left me cancer-free. But I wasn't thinking about the tumor, I wasn't thinking about the machine or the results. I was thinking about her. The woman who wasn't in the hallway, the woman who hadn't shown up in 3 days, the woman who had walked out of my life the moment death did. I was thinking of how her silence no longer hurt, it simply confirmed what I already knew. I stared at the ceiling tiles as they pushed me forward. The hospital lights overhead passed in slow rhythm, like streetlights on a lonely drive. And somewhere between the sixth and seventh light, I made a quiet promise to myself. Once I come out of this machine, I'm done. Done waiting for a woman who only showed up when guilt demanded it. Done bleeding for someone who couldn't even be bothered to bandage the wound she left behind. This was the final scan. But in my heart, it already felt like a funeral. And this time, I wasn't the one being buried. She was. The MRI room was cold. Steel blue walls, a humming silence that felt thicker than air. The technician gave me the usual instructions: no movement, no metal, no fear. I was slid into the tunnel like a letter into a mailbox, sent off to be read, scanned, analyzed. The sound began. A low mechanical pulse that rose and fell in waves, thudding, buzzing, clicking, a language only machines understood, and inside that noise, I found clarity, a strange kind of peace, like the chaos of the world had been replaced with a metronome that only measured truth. Each pulse was like a heartbeat, each thud a reminder of what I'd been through, what I had lost, what I no longer wanted back. There, in that narrow coffin of magnets and hums, I saw her face. Not as it was, but as it truly had become, distant, cold, a stranger wrapped in the costume of someone I once trusted. I remembered how she used to whisper, "Forever, okay?" and how quickly forever became convenience. Her absence hadn't killed me, it had cured me, because sometimes the wound isn't what breaks you, it's the hand you expected to hold you through it, the hand that let go first. The machine clicked louder, echoes like metal teeth gnashing, and I breathed through it, not with panic, but with purpose. Her betrayal, the beach, the lies, the excuses, it was medicine, a bitter pill, yes, but medicine nonetheless. I had been dying not just from a tumor, but from the illusion that her love was real, that it was enough, that I was enough for her. But now I understood. I was never meant to be healed by her, I was meant to survive in spite of her. The machine whirred down, the table slid out slowly, the ceiling greeted me like an old friend, unmoving, unchanged, but I was different now. The technician smiled. "We'll have results soon, but everything looks good." I nodded, saying nothing, not because I was afraid, but because fear no longer ruled me, not fear of death, not fear of her. Back in the room, the nurse came in with a chart. She read it over, then looked at me with that gentle, practiced smile they give survivors. "You're clear." 2 words, simple, but seismic. I blinked, felt the edges of my mouth twitch upward, then curve into a real smile, not out of celebration, not out of relief, but because I knew what came next, not survival, freedom, not from illness, but from her, from the ghost of a love that never really stayed, from the memory of a girl who only held my hand until it got inconvenient. And I didn't cry, didn't exhale some dramatic sob. I just sat there, hand on the blanket, and whispered, "I'm free." I looked out the window. The sky was soft blue, feathered with gold near the horizon. Not dramatic, not stormy, just clear. Like me, like my future, like the parts of me that no longer needed her permission to heal. The door opened like it didn't want to be part of this moment. Soft creak, shuffling steps, perfume before presence, and then there she was. In a pale dress meant to look innocent, with curls done too carefully, and makeup just messy enough to say, "I've been crying," but not enough to smudge her mascara. She clutched a bouquet like it had a chance to rewrite the past, lilies, the kind I once told her reminded me of grief. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate, just walked in like the silence I'd built was still hers to shatter. "Hey," she breathed, a practiced tremble in her voice. I didn't respond, not with words, not with movement, just stared at her, as if watching a ghost forget its own name. She placed the flowers on the windowsill, right next to Alicia's fading bouquet. The contrast was cruel, one was quiet kindness, the other, guilt dressed in color. She stepped closer, eyes wet, but not from grief, from strategy. "I was confused," she began, voice shaking like a violin string pulled too tight. "The beach trip, it was a mistake." She didn't say his name, didn't apologize, didn't even ask how I was. Just crafted her lines like she'd rehearsed in front of a mirror, like she still thought I was the man who'd swallow excuses just to feel loved again. She reached for my hand, fingertips barely brushing my knuckles, a gesture that once meant everything. But I didn't flinch, didn't move. Because the boy who would have melted for that touch, he died on the table, and the man who woke up? He remembered. I looked her in the eyes. Really looked. Not through the lens of memory, not through the filter of forgiveness. But with the clarity that comes when pain has run dry. Her lip trembled. She was waiting for something, a reaction, a tear, a plea. But all I gave her was a sentence, the final one she'd ever get. You only came back when I stopped needing you. The words landed like thunder in a silent church. She blinked, stunned, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. She stepped back, eyes darted to the flowers, the machines, anywhere but me. Because she knew now, the power she once had, gone, evaporated with every unanswered call I never made, every memory I chose not to feed. She opened her mouth again, but there was nothing left to say. No script, no stage, no audience, just a man who'd finally chosen himself, and a woman who showed up too late to matter. She turned to leave, and for a second, I thought she'd slam the door, demand drama, leave me with a final gust of wind and perfume. But she didn't. She walked out quietly, like even the air had stopped waiting for her return. The silence after was loud, but not the kind that hurt, the kind that healed. Because some closures don't need grand exits, no yelling, no vengeance, no final desperate kiss. Just a still room, and a heartbeat that finally knows where it belongs. I looked down at my hand, the one she tried to touch, and then to the vase beside my bed, 2 bouquets, side by side. One, a performance, the other, a whisper of kindness that had no strings attached. I reached forward, took Alicia's flower, and brought it to my chest. Not because it meant something romantic, but because it reminded me of something real. Of care that didn't ask to be forgiven, of moments that didn't need to be begged for. Outside the window, the sky was shifting, blue fading to gold, then into something softer. And as the sun dipped below the edge of the hospital roof, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her, not for answers, not even for healing. Because I had already begun. Love didn't crash into me like thunder, it didn't blaze through my chest or send fire through my veins, it arrived slowly, soft, almost shy, in the form of 5 extra minutes. That's all it was at first, Alicia staying just a little longer at the edge of my room, not out of duty, not because the clock told her to, but because she chose to. Sometimes she brought tea, sometimes she didn't say a word, but she always looked at me like I wasn't broken, just healing. I didn't fall in love with her, not instantly, not foolishly. But I began to notice things, the way her coat always smelled faintly of lavender soap, the way she never asked what had happened unless I opened the door first, the way she waited, not just for silence to end, but for trust to begin. She asked if I dreamed during surgery once. I told her I didn't remember, but if I had, maybe I would have dreamed of someone like her, someone quiet, constant and real. She wasn't loud in her presence, didn't try to fill the air with distractions, she just existed next to me like a still lake at dusk, reflecting what I didn't even know I was showing. Once, during a rainstorm that tapped gently against the hospital glass, she sat beside me while I stared at the window. Neither of us spoke, but her presence wrapped around me like a soft blanket, one I didn't know I needed until I realized how long I'd been cold. Alicia never offered herself as a replacement, never leaned too close or looked at me like a puzzle she wanted to solve. She simply stayed. In that space between professional and personal, between caring and careful. One day, she found a book I had left open on the table. She ran her finger along the underlined sentence and smiled. Some people arrive and quietly stay, others arrive, leave chaos, and call it love. She looked up at me and didn't say a word. Just nodded. And that nod, stayed with me longer than most love letters. I asked her once, jokingly, why she kept coming back to my room after her shift. She shrugged. Because you look like you don't know how to be seen anymore. I laughed then, a real one, short, dry, but real, and for a moment, I wasn't the man who had been left behind, I was just a person, visible again. I started looking forward to her pauses. They weren't grand gestures, she never brought gifts, never tried to patch my wounds with romantic promises. But every time she lingered at the door, every time she asked, "Need anything before I go?" it felt like someone choosing me with their time, not their guilt. That was new, that was rare. She'd ask about the dreams, sure, but never about her, never about the girl who ghosted me with good intentions and Instagram captions. She gave me space to unfold, like a letter that had been sealed too long. And in that unfolding, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. Maybe I wasn't impossible to love, maybe I'd just been loving people who made it feel that way. There was a moment, quiet, almost forgettable, when Alicia reached over to fix the loose knot on my hospital gown. Her hand brushed my shoulder and she paused. Not out of fear, not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. Like she didn't want to touch something that hadn't invited her in. That pause, it told me everything. She wasn't here to claim, she was here to witness. I didn't tell her how much that meant. Didn't try to romanticize the timing, didn't push for anything more. Because for the first time, I wasn't desperate for someone to stay, I was simply grateful that she did. And that difference changed everything. In a world where people barge in, rearrange your heart, and call it love, Alicia paused. She knocked without knocking, listened without prying, held space without rushing to fill it. And I began to wonder, what would it feel like to be chosen like this? Not out of pity, not out of performance, but because someone saw me, and stayed. I don't know if Alicia felt what I did, if she noticed the way the room softened when she was near, if she saw how her silence healed what others' words had broken. But I know this. Some people don't need to say they care, they just do. In the way they pour your tea, in the way they remember your meds, in the way they stay. 5 extra minutes longer than they have to. And that was enough. For now. There are some things too heavy to say out loud, too jagged to speak, too raw to share in rooms filled with light, so I wrote. Not because I wanted her to read it, but because the words were festering inside me like an infection, and writing was the only way to cut it out. A letter, 4 pages, no salutation, no date, just ink, emotion, and the weight of a man who once offered his whole life in exchange for one person's love. I started slow. I don't hate you. That was the first line. Because I didn't. And that was somehow worse. Hate would have made it easier to let go. Hate would have given me clean edges to cut with. But what I had was messier. A grieving affection. A kind of mourning for a version of her that died long before she walked out of the hospital room. I told her everything I hadn't said, everything I hadn't been allowed to say, not when I was buried under morphine, not when I was blinking against the blur of heartbreak, not when I had a needle in my arm and her name still echoing in my head like a mantra I couldn't let go of. I wrote about the nights I stayed awake, listening to the hum of machines, wondering if she would finally walk in at 3 a.m. I wrote about how I prayed, not to a God I believed in, but to the chance of us. I begged the universe not just to let me live, but to let me live for her. That was the most brutal part to confess, that I didn't fight death for myself. I fought it because I thought she'd be there on the other side. The pen scratched harder with every word. Each sentence a wound reopening, each paragraph a memory I hadn't dared to touch. I told her I understood. That maybe she was scared. That maybe she was broken too. That maybe love for her had always been performance, and I had mistaken applause for affection. But then I told her something else, something I had never dared admit even to myself. Hat when I survived. She didn't know what to do with me anymore. Because I wasn't fragile, I wasn't bleeding, I wasn't dependent. And she needed someone who needed her pain, not someone who had already faced the worst of it and lived. I folded the pages with trembling hands, each crease was a release, a final goodbye to the version of myself who had stayed for too long in someone else's shadow. I didn't put it in an envelope, didn't scrawl her name on the front, because it wasn't hers anymore, it was mine. A love letter turned autopsy report. That night, the hospital was unusually quiet. No monitors beeping, no footsteps in the hall. Even the rain that had danced on the windows for 3 days had stopped, as if the world was holding its breath for this moment. I wheeled myself to the staff patio just beyond the corridor. Alicia had told me they left the door cracked for fresh air. Tonight, it welcomed me like a sigh. There was an old metal ashtray beside the bench. No one used it anymore, but it waited there anyway, forgotten, but useful. I sat down, Unfolded the letter one last time, read every line, aloud in my head, felt each word pierce, heal, then release. Then I struck a match. The flame was small, almost shy, but it did its job. The paper curled in on itself like it was wincing, edges turning black, ink disappearing into smoke, until there was nothing left but ash and breath. Forgiveness doesn't always need a witness. Sometimes it only needs fire. Not to destroy, but to purify. As I watched the last ember flicker and die, I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Not the kind sold in pretty quotes and Instagram stories. Not the kind that comes from someone else telling you you're strong, but the kind you earn, in the quiet, in the smoke, in the truth. I didn't write another letter, didn't keep a copy. Because healing isn't found in reminders, it's found in what you finally let go of. A soft breeze moved through the patio, carried the ash across the floor in gentle spirals, and I watched it drift, knowing she'd never read the words, but that somehow, they still set me free. It was raining the day I was discharged, not the dramatic kind, no thunder, no lightning, just a soft drizzle that coated everything in silver, gentle, cleansing, final. 6 months had passed since the day I woke up in that bed, 6 months since my heart raced not from love, but from machines, since my ribs ached with both recovery and realization, since I learned that survival was more than a heartbeat, it was a decision. Today, I walked out of the hospital for the last time. No IVs trailing behind me, no bandages gripping my skin, no waiting room full of apologies that never arrived, no her, just me. And a quiet confidence that had been forged in silence, honed by pain, and stitched into place by every broken heartbeat that refused to stop. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and old flowers, the kind of scent that stays with you long after you leave. A nurse smiled at me as I passed, not Alicia, though I'd said goodbye to her 3 days earlier. She'd hugged me, soft and brief. Said, "You'll be okay now," but not because of anyone else. I had nodded, because she was right. Healing didn't come from love, it came from truth. I stepped through the front doors, the sliding glass parting like a curtain at the end of a long, strange performance. The wind hit my face, it smelled like petrichor, the first scent of a world starting over. And for once, I didn't brace myself. Because I was no longer afraid of what came next, not of who might show up, not of who might leave, just free. My shoes hit the pavement like punctuation, firm, steady, real. I didn't look back, didn't pause to let the nostalgia catch up, didn't let my shadow stretch toward that building like a tether I couldn't cut. Because the version of me who had loved her, the man who had begged the universe to let him survive for someone else, the one who would have flinched if she called his name from behind? He didn't survive the surgery. He had died the moment he opened his eyes to find an empty chair, a quiet phone, and a truth too loud to ignore. The man walking now? He was different. He didn't carry the weight of what-ifs. He didn't wonder if she missed him. He didn't replay conversations, looking for cracks that explained why he was never enough. He had stopped needing closure. Because sometimes the only door that matters is the one you walk through alone. I passed a woman on the sidewalk. She smiled politely. I smiled back. Not because I wanted anything from her, not because I needed to be seen, but because I finally was. By me. Across the street, kids were playing in the drizzle, their laughter sharp and real. Water splashed beneath their feet, a little girl twirled in circles, arms stretched, unafraid of slipping, and I stood still. For a moment, I watched, not with envy, not with regret, just wonder. Because once upon a time, I thought love was supposed to be dramatic, loud, all-consuming, the kind that breaks you, then begs to rebuild. But now I knew better. The love that saves you doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it doesn't disappear when the room turns quiet. It stays, it pauses, it shows up, even when no one's watching. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling the smooth edge of a single folded paper I kept with me. It wasn't the old letter, I had burned that. This one, just a list of things I'd do for myself, see the ocean again, write something that wasn't about pain, eat something sweet without guilt, sleep in a room where no machines beep, choose people who choose me back, simple things, but they felt like gold. I crossed the street slowly, letting the rain dot my shoulders. It didn't bother me, I didn't run, because discomfort wasn't danger anymore, and solitude, it no longer felt like punishment, it felt like home. A taxi stopped near the curb. The driver asked where I was headed. I smiled. Anywhere but back. And as I slid into the seat, closed the door, and watched the hospital shrink behind me, I realized, you don't always walk out with someone holding your hand. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to walk out holding your own.